lastly speaking for us is from World Bank, Andres Pedersen, senior energy specialist at the World Bank ESMA program.
So really excited to joining you all today, and I really want to thank Duke for putting such an excellent program together. I'm Anders Pedersen. I'm from the World Bank's Energy Sector Management Assistance Program. It's a long word for a 40-year-old trust fund that sits within the World Bank, but the way you can think of it is it's the global energy think tank within the bank that tries to provide countries with support, expertise, and knowledge. And I got to say, it's a real treat to be here, and I'm standing up here with quite a bit of humility. I've spent the last 10, 15 years in the field of open data, and I think this event really ties up a lot of nice things with me also, and sort of how I've traversed through this, in and out of this community. I started with Open Knowledge Foundation back in the early 10s. It was a scrappy UK NGO that worked on open data definitions. We helped build some of the first open data platforms for the GSA and the US government. And actually one of the first grants we got from Sloan Foundation for an open economics program. And maybe one more word on the organizers. I told my wife that I was going here, and I said, this is one for the bucket list. Her entire family is from university or from Madison, so it's really exciting to be at a conference with where University of Madison is organizing. So, but I'll get to the program. I'm sitting within the energy program at the World Bank, and we are doing a lot of different things. And really, I think Kate provided a really nice overview of the complexity challenges that we are seeing in the energy sector. It is very, very difficult. It touches on technological issues, engineering issues, governance issues, political issues, as Brian points out, and economics ultimately. So it's a very, very challenging area. My role is at the program is to really work on the energy data side, use of AI, where we are trying some of the things with a bit of resources, and trying to shape that and design it in ways so that countries can really actively work and apply it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about a smaller niche within our program that we worked on that focus on transmission grid mapping. So I won't give you the whole overview of all the different things we do. Happy to do that bilaterally with any of you later over drinks, but I do want to dive into one topic where we've applied AI to give you a bit of flair of how we are looking at it, and then I really want to talk about some of the use cases for this, because I really think what's so nice about this panel you brought together is that we're all talking about data for what, right? How do you drive data for decision making? How do you think about political buy-in? How do you think data within the larger governance space? That's really all very critical pieces. But first, just a very quick plug to all of my colleagues at SMAP. Many of you have already mentioned the MTF surveys that we published for a number of countries, work that we are continuing to doing, working closely with Brian and others. And we also produce a number of other reports. We provide a global tracking report. That's the famous 700 millions that Brian mentioned, and we can discuss that further if needed. And a lot of other indicators that we're putting out. I manage also our energydata.info site that now hosts more than 1,000 data sets. We have platforms and tools for things like the Global Solar Atlas and Global Wind Atlas that have thousands of users each year. But let me dive a little bit into transmission grids. I mean, I think when we talk about energy access, etc., there is a tremendous revolution happening right now in mini grids, in off grids. We are seeing incredible innovations in how we monitor them. Some of the latest I'm hearing from my colleagues is actually, it was funny when we heard the presentation from Duke Energy of sending drones out to monitor. they're thinking around how to do results-based financing for similar ways for off-grid solar, right? How do you monitor if a mini-grid was actually deployed? Well, why not say drones to bring down costs? So there's a lot of technological innovation happening around mini-grids. I think what I want to, and the reason why we are bringing transmission grids into this discussion is that transmission grids are in some ways the quiet workhorse in the energy system that maybe a little bit suffers from attention from time to time. And there are good reasons for it, because it's sturdy, it's expensive to build, and 20 years later it's still expensive to build. So when we talk about all these cool learning curves of solar costs coming down, of wind coming down, not so fast, but also coming down, learning curves for green hydrogen, we're not seeing the same learning curves for transmission. They're there, and we have interesting numbers that we're looking at, but the learning curves are not as fast. Another piece comes back to the governance, because like transmission grids requires utilities that need some scale, and they come with all the difficulties of governance challenges, etc. So, long story short, there are reasons why transmission grids are complicated and maybe not always as appealing to look at, but they are really important. Lots of people have done super interesting things on transmission grids over the years, but just to give you a sense of like the trajectory we're trying to get from, we have lots of utilities where when you ask the engineers, they say, yes, we of course know where our grids are. We know where our lines are going, and we're certainly not disputing that. But they're often in either nodal maps, or if there's GPS data or GIS data, it's sitting on some hard drive in one department. It's not being shared, and you don't have an integrated system that can support decision-making at a more structural level. And when I talk about GIS data here and geospatial data, I'm really talking about getting us georeferenced information down at the asset level on each transmission tower. Like, it's not enough just to know the line. We actually want to know where the transmission towers are, because that can help us do some of the decision making that's needed. So we've started piloting an approach where we essentially go through a couple of steps to map the transmission grids. We start with a lot of open assets, and actually WRI's Global Power Plant database is one of the pieces that feed into this. OpenStreetMap has also proven to be actually very credible in terms of providing even transmission tower locations. And then we acquire satellite imagery, and we deploy a detection model on top of that imagery, and we use the base assets to conduct smart tracing in order to detect the lines. And then in the end, we try to validate it in these difficult meetings with government stakeholders, which Brian has very neatly outlined that that's not always easy, but that's what we do. I'll try to keep up the pace, but it's just to give you a flair of what we're doing. We essentially detect one tower, we look around, see if we can find others, and then we move around in that way. And eventually we find a line. This is work that's been done with, and I can't take credit for this by any means. We're working with a Dutch geospatial firm called NEO that's helped us develop this model over the last year or so. And one of the important points is that this is like, we've spent lots of time with open data, and open satellite imagery is of course fantastic, but for some of this cutting edge work, we're not there yet where we can use Sentinel data for doing this. So this is a 50 centimeter resolution data that's purchased through one of the large providers, Mapbox, but we essentially tested all the different commercial providers, ended up with Mapbox. And I think what's just interesting and important to emphasize is that, you know, finding cost-saving methodologies for some of this work is still really important. And so we spent a lot of time throughout this project trying to identify how can we bring down the number of images that we need to purchase. And essentially, in a country like Liberia, we've cut the purchasing with 99%. In Bangladesh, a little less, because Bangladesh has a lot more grids. And then we go and do validation, and we try to do that with whatever information we can get from utilities, from other stakeholders in a variety of ways. But I do really want to emphasize this value of like granularity matters for decision making, and it matters for how we want to deploy these things. So I'm going to try to talk a little bit about some of the use cases we are considering. So we're thinking about how to manage transmission grids better. Things like, how do you ensure that a part of your grids that's more vulnerable or that's more exposed to weather or other things, how do you do the practical scheduling of saying patrol teams should come out more frequently here than there? Well, if we all have, in many countries, we have utilities that are capped in number of salaried staff, and they need to build hundreds of kilometers of new transmission lines. How do you square that circle? So even countries with low labor costs within their utility, they need to deal with very practical challenges of how to deploy their staff more efficiently for O&M. For retrofit planning, we believe there's a lot to do. And similarly, of course, because the World Bank is a lending organization, we are of course thinking a lot about how can this knowledge about the existing grid be applied when new sites are placed. And again, because we are having a granular approach where we really understand where each transmission tower is, we can do location-based decision-making that's much more granular than, for example, if you look at risk at a country level. So it becomes much more local. So this part of our work is done together with the European Space Agency. They have a global development program where they work with many of the multilaterals, and we are working with them to pilot this on flood risk, landslide, and wind. And what's really interesting, and this is some of the earliest results we have of it, is that we can then start to actually also show utilities interesting things. Because think about if you're an engineer and you know where your lines are, why does it matter that you get a nice geospatial system that can show you where your lines are? Well, not very exciting. What if you could then see what are the flood risk levels? Now, we have just an example here where you can see some of these are red and some of these are yellow. And we can, of course, discuss where should the right threshold be, where's the risk, what is the right threshold for risk. But ultimately, we can start giving a kind of gradient and help countries understand how do you take a data-driven approach to risk at the very local level. Just here in the end, I want to bring up this thing of the importance of incorporating the data we find, the cool new approaches we do. They need to make it into country systems for decision making. And that means that we need to build sustainable systems for how do you get a GIS system to work so that it can both be used for operations and maintenance, how it can be used for vegetation management, how it can be used for the next investment decision. It needs to we need to catch more buckets of these where we really provide value, because if we don't do that, our data sets are going to sit around on the outside and they're not really going to help us drive ourselves forward. So we really need this, I think, we need leapfrogging of technologies where we learn from each other very rapidly, from one country to another, from one utility to another. And then we need the systems to be deployed also very rapidly, and it is very difficult, right? Kate, you've said 5 years is not a lot, and I fully agree. The last thing I'll just mention is an example on vegetation alert, and it's one that we are trying now to pilot as a use case, again to help countries think about what is the added value for putting all these things into a system. And what we're thinking about is to use, we are again working with the ESA, they have some experiences from European utilities for how you can use Sentinel-based satellite imagery to actually do vegetation alerts around crop growth and forest growth around your transmission lines, right? So if you have granular transmission data, and if you have frequent data on how tree growth is happening around your lines, then you can do interesting analysis, and you can deploy your utility staff to the vegetation areas that are most urgent and most risky. Thank you very much.